Hey, my friends, thank you so much for listening again. I have a very different conversation for you. I brought in my friend Safrianna Luna, who is a therapist. She discusses a little bit about some of her background, and unfortunately, it includes SA. So I just want to give you that trigger warning. But we really dive into polyamorous relationships, and I thought it would be really informative to bring her in and talk about this because as I was doing some research on divorce rates and the causes of divorce nowadays, I read that almost 40% of the US population is open to poly type of relationships. And that was really, really surprising to me. So we dive right into that. I just want to give you a heads up that if you have little kids nearby and this is the type of information that you don't want them to hear, then go ahead and pause it now or put in some earphones. And again, she does discuss a little bit about what happened to her with SA and, and she describes what a poly type of relationship is. She also discusses, the type of therapy methods that she uses. So I hope that you really enjoy it. I hope that if anything that you educate yourself and are able to shed any type of myths that you've heard or judgments or anything like that. All right, let's get to it. I have another amazing speaker today, Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide, and she is also an LCPC. I knew I was going to mess that up. Safrianna, how are you?
I am doing as well as I possibly can be, feeling just very blessed to be in the creative flow at this point in time.
Oh, I hear you because it can be rough, especially with all the chaos going on in the nation right now. It can be rough to kind of like focus.
Absolutely.
So let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a retired public school teacher and still trauma therapist who decided to just branch out and be who I fully am. So now I show up in the world as the queer spirit guide, somebody who helps people understand queer issues and terms and what that really means. And I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and a very multi-passionate person in general. So I do it all. That's why I said I'm really blessed to be in the creative flow right now because when everything feels chaotic, I'm glad I can go to my creative projects and feel like I'm doing something really meaningful. So my books are really my passion at this time in the world.
That's a really healthy way to not only let out what needs to come out, but also to share that with others to learn from.
Hmm.
Um, and we'll talk about your books later, but give us a little more background about like your childhood, how you grew up, and how you ended up doing the work that you do today.
Yeah, so I grew up in poverty, like the kind of poverty where you don't have clothes and you have to skip meals kind of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up in a very, interesting situation because I looked very privileged on the outside living with our grandmother, but at home, like behind closed doors, was literally starving, and just not having access to the resources that I needed to have, right? Clothes that fit, warm clothing, uh, food, the basic necessities of
Right.
survival. And that continued until my mom got remarried and we moved to Maryland and from New York and moved in with a man who did make good money, but unfortunately was a major abuser both to adults and children. So I spent most of my childhood in a childhood sexual abuse situation that really, made me question everything about who I was, lose my body integrity, just all of that. Like I had to contend with all of that, which was how I ended up starting to write poetry when I was 11, to try and deal with those feelings. And at the same time, when I was 11, I realized I was queer and started dating another girl from school. And my childhood abuser, who I refer to in my writing as the Reaper, because he kind of, killed off my childhood, found out and used religion to control and demean me and make sure that I would not continue that relationship. And so I basically became a shell of myself until I was 18. And when I was 18, the day I turned 18, I moved away from home, moved in with an older man, and got married. because it was,
Wow.
what I
Hmm.
knew. And so I really just ended up out of the frying pan into the fire. And it took years to unpack that. And that was when I started going to school to become a teacher. So I knew I wanted to be an adult that could be there for kids and kind of recognize like when a kid wasn't doing well or if they needed a little bit of extra help or support. And then I graduated, became a teacher, and got right into a domestic violence, intimate partner violence situation with a narcissist and started my teaching career. And that just kind of continued to open me up into like, oh my gosh, I need to help more people.
Right. Okay, wait, hold on. So you
Yeah.
live with this narcissistic, abusive stepfather,
Yes.
leave home at age 18 and marry an older man. How much older? Do you mind
He was
asking?
six years older,
Six.
which was
That's,
actually the age difference between my parents,
oh,
interestingly enough, who
yeah.
got married
Mhm.
when my mom was underage. So
Right.
this is very
Okay.
generational trauma patterns.
Yeah, I see that. And so this person, this husband, how long were you with him for?
It was right around 7 years. We married
Mhm.
when I was 18 and we split right before I turned 20. Actually, I asked him for a divorce on my
Mhm.
23rd birthday.
Wow, wow. Yeah, that's a long time, and that's also a big age gap for someone that young. Because I
Hmm.
mean, as we get older, it doesn't really matter as much because you've had so much life experience. But when you're very young, marrying an older person, it's almost like
Absolutely.
that's not really your partner. That's more like another parent figure.
Right.
And then you mentioned, so that was not a good marriage. And throughout that time, you went to school, you became a teacher,
Hmm.
and then you were into another relationship that was
Yeah.
abusive?
So,
Okay.
part of my story is that I'm polyamorous, and this is something
Hmm.
I teach about so much. So, it was completely known and accepted in my marriage that I was dating other people. I was very honest about it. And I literally met this narcissist who love bombed the hell out of me. And I didn't know what that was at the time. Like, I had no education on domestic violence and intimate partner violence whatsoever. So I was in this neglectful marriage with this older guy who was not really giving me the attention that he did when I was a kid, when I was 15 and we first started dating,
Hmm.
right? You can put two and two together there.
Hmm.
Uh, and so this guy comes along who's right around my age, and we have all these interests in common. And I just got completely sucked in, and it was just downhill from there. Like literally, I knew I needed to leave the marriage because the marriage wasn't good,
Hmm.
and I recognized that. So we were already going downhill. We had lost a child together, and that really brought everything up to the surface and brought some extra trauma out on both of our halves. And I was like, yeah, this is over. And so I was transitioning with that polyamory. I was already starting to date this other person. And he was just like showering me with all of the love, all of the affection, nice dates, romantic poems, you name it. Like everything I had ever dreamed a man would give me to show me that I mattered and that I had
Hmm.
value and that he was paying attention to me. And then that quickly stopped and the abuse started.
Wow, wow. I have a question about your previous abuse as a child, right?
Yeah.
Did you happen to share that with your partners? And do you think that by sharing that, it kind of like they weaponized it against you somehow?
I definitely think that that narcissistic relationship absolutely did. There was actually a moment um, I'll call him the love bomber because that's what I refer to him in my writing as. So the love bomber, there was actually a moment I remember we'd only been together maybe 3, 4 months at this point, and the abuse had started. The love bombing had kind of faded, and we were in the cycle of violence, as it's called, where we would honeymoon and then there'd be an explosion, and we'd honeymoon and there'd be an explosion, and the cycle just was continuing. And I remember one night we were laying in bed and I just thought, oh my gosh, this relationship seems exactly like my dynamic with that stepfather, the Reaper. And I was like, just my mind was blown. But then I'm like, oh well, this is just how it's supposed to be. That's just
Mm,
normal, right?
mm.
Because that was all I ever knew. It was so normalized in my nervous system that I just kind of caved in at that point. Whereas the relationship with that first husband, he was actually like I told him he was the first person I told about the abuse with the stepfather. And I was on the verge of committing suicide when I was 15. And I told him, like, I'm thinking of exiting this ride because all of this awful stuff has happened to me. And he actually convinced me not to. Like, he told me my
Mhm.
life had value and worth and that I should stay alive, which is, of course, why I went and married him, because it was the first person
Mhm.
who told me, like, you don't deserve
Okay.
that.
Right.
So he didn't really weaponize it, but I think that he probably saw, like, this is a very vulnerable person and like I can go with this. Like he seemed less malicious than the love bomber for sure. The love bomber absolutely, like, he wanted to quote unquote know everything about me. He wanted to know all of my history. And then he would kind of tell me these violent stories in return, like, oh yeah, when I was younger, these violent things happened because I did them,
Oh, wow.
which come to find out after talking to his ex-wife after we split another 7 years later. Uh, I go in sevens. He really didn't do those past things, and it was just stories he was making up to make me afraid of him and to try and say he had gotten better. He was getting
Wow.
better.
Hmm.
So I know all about these tactics now.
This is rough and super heavy for a young person to go through. Well, for anybody to go through.
Oh, yeah.
So, after going through all of that, how do you end up in a space where you say, okay, you know what? I've been teaching kids, I've been helping them, but now I'm going to go into the mental health space to help people?
Yeah. So I was very closeted myself about my queer identity the whole time I was teaching because I heard comments from other teachers that were homophobic and, just super problematic. So I kept myself very, very closeted, save a few teachers. But I had a little, like, this is a safe space for everyone poster in my classroom that was kind of over by my desk. So really, if a teacher walked by, they wouldn't really see it, but the kids would see it when they would come up to my desk. And next thing I know, I have this crew of 6 to 7 kids in my room every day for lunch who are telling me, oh, I think I might be trans. I'm like exploring my gender. Oh, I have a crush on a girl and I'm a girl. And, what are people going to think about that? And, this is the age I was teaching 8th grade. So that's like 13, 14-year-olds. They're all about the crushes and the hormones and all of that. So I was getting these kids who wanted to tell me, like, I can't tell my parents because they're gonna do blah 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 to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I want to help more, but I'm your teacher, I'm not your counselor. So there are certain things you're gonna have to go to guidance and talk about. And when I had to draw that boundary professionally, it like made my soul ache.
Hmm.
And so I'm at home actively being abused at this time. I'm seeing these vulnerable kids and I'm like, what more can I do? So that was when I decided to go to grad school to become a therapist. And fast forward to my internship, the therapist I was seeing at the time knew what was going on at home, but never knew quite how to approach it with me to say, you should probably leave because you don't really want to give your clients like advice they don't want to hear because it can really backfire. That actually did happen with me when I was young and seeing a therapist and she told me what to do and I was like, well, I don't want to see you anymore because broke the trust. So this therapist didn't really want to approach this, I don't think. So she was like, you should go get your internship at Hartley House. And Hartley House is a local domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault and abuse, and child abuse center. They have a shelter, they have counseling services. And I went and got my internship there, and I'm doing the training, day one, the training. And they're like, today we're just going to teach you about what domestic violence and intimate partner violence look like. And I'm looking at the screen and I'm, following along with the PowerPoint. I'm taking notes. And every single category of abuse that they went through was happening in my house. And
Mm.
that's when I was like, okay, I really have to do more about this.
Was that the first time that you really realized that you were in that situation?
I wish it wasn't, but it was the second time I had that really big awakening because in the very beginning of the relationship with the love bomber, so my ex-husband had moved away. I had another ex-boyfriend at the time that I kind of broke up with around the same time because again, polyamory, it's complicated, but all in the open in my case. And I had literally just become alone minus the love bomber pretty much. And at that point, gosh, we were maybe 6 weeks in, and he was starting to amp up abusive type tactics. He had gone from all this love, 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 affection, sweet dates, movie dates, cooking me meals, having me over. And I looked back at our first date and I was like, not our first date, but our second date where I went over to visit him. And I realized that he had sexually assaulted me and that there was no consent. And I was like, oh, that, now that I really think about it, that really feels awful. In the
Mm-hmm.
moment, it felt like the heat of passion and like, oh, he just misunderstood my signals. No, because then he was starting to amp up these other tactics. So I told him, I thought maybe we should take a break. And when I told him I thought maybe we should take a break, I happened to call the domestic violence hotline, I think. And they were like, yes, this sounds like domestic violence. And we would recommend leaving. You want to make a safety plan, blah, blah, blah. And so I met him at a mall. I remember telling my parents, I'm going to meet this guy at the mall to break up with him. If you do not hear from me within 2 hours, here's his name, here's his phone number, here's where I'm going because I am actually concerned for my safety. And I went and I tried to break up with him. And I say tried because he threw the biggest man tantrum you have ever seen. He threw out every, pretty word, that honeymoon phase coming back, like, I'm going to get better. I love you, blah, blah, blah. And I even remember afterwards, I was like, okay, we'll do a break instead of a breakup. And we'll talk again in like 6 weeks and see where we're at. And I had parked on the other side of the mall from where I knew we were meeting. And I walked back across the mall away from him. I like tried to make it not obvious where I was going. And when I got to my car, he had pulled his truck around to where I was and started, you can't do this. You can't break up with me. Like, you better talk to me, all of this. And I just got, I mean, we did take the break. He went and did a bunch of stuff during that time that I didn't find out till way later that could have impacted my health. Thank God it didn't. But he ended up, continuing to send me texts about how he was going to cheat on me, and which he kind of did multiple times throughout the relationship. But these threats, until I finally messaged him back and was like, okay, I'll finally talk to you. It's your birthday, because all of the guilt tripping got through to me. And then I was in it for another 6 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I have
Until
so
this
many
training.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I have so many questions. There's something that really caught my attention that you said. You said that you later realized that you had been sexually assaulted
Hmm.
because there was confusion with like there had been some passion. And I know that listeners are probably going to be like, wait a minute, how can there be passion if you were also assaulted? The two don't seem to, you know, it's like impossible for those two to exist. So can you speak a little bit on that to give people an idea of how someone can be sexually assaulted and not understand that that is what happened at the time, and they,
Oh, yeah.
something, yeah, they recognize it later.
Yeah, so I'm going to give some detail here that could be sensitive, but I want
Okay.
to really like highlight some things. So in my case, now I am a multi-sexual assault survivor. I have been assaulted by multiple people. Some cases much more obvious than others. In this case, again, it's our second date. We've never talked about sex really at this point. And we were kissing. And I could tell he was kind of being like a little timid. And I was like, you don't have to hold back. Like, it's okay. You can lean in. You don't have to hold back. And he took that as permission to flip me over and do what he wanted without protection, without checking in to see if that's what I meant at all. And when I, after the fact, said, like, I didn't say I wanted that. We were kissing. And I said, I don't want you to hold back in what we're currently doing. And you didn't check in about what I meant by that. And like, I didn't have a choice. And also, you didn't use protection. And we've never talked about STIs yet. Like, what? What the heck? And he literally was like, oh, I just thought we were really in the moment. And when I say passion, I mean on his end. I was like, oh, he's just really passionate. Because my body language was frozen when this happened. Like, I was not enjoying myself. I was just frozen. Like, what is happening? Am I going to get pregnant? Am I safe? Does he have a disease? Like, I don't know any of this at this point because we've never talked about it. And when I'm trying to express like that really wasn't okay, that happened, he literally turned around and he said, "Of course it's okay. I love you." Second date.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So that's why in hindsight I'm able to look
Hmm.
back and go, okay, you completely bypassed any conversation. You did not check in about anything, sensitive. Uh because you don't just escalate from kissing to that. Like that's not normal behavior. When it's your first time with somebody who you don't know and you've never had conversations about
Hmm.
sexuality with.
Hmm.
And anytime that you don't give an enthusiastic yes to something and somebody does something without talking to you about it, that can be an assault. And there's so many subtle things that go into play there. But again, in this case, there was no conversation about consent or my needs or if I was ready or anything like that, which is not normal sexual behavior with a new partner.
And
It was
also,
control.
and also the fact that you were frozen, which I assume that means you weren't able to move or speak because it's part
Well,
of shock or trauma.
yes, that fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response are our most common trauma responses. And when we go into that, parts of our brain are literally offline. It's a huge misconception in the world when we are talking about sexual abuse and assault cases that they say, well, why didn't you fight back or why didn't you say no? You must have wanted it. In fact, that part of the brain that can reason and like talk and advocate is literally offline in those cases. And there is no, like, for many people, there's no verbalizing a no.
Hmm.
Also, verbalizing a no in the middle of already being assaulted by somebody who is much bigger than you, stronger than you, who is pinning you.
Hmm.
What do you think is going to happen? Our nervous system goes, right? Freeze like a wild animal so that I don't get more hurt than I could be if I thrash or I fight. And
Hmm.
that is such a normal response for people. And victims get shamed all the time for how they responded when they didn't really have a choice in how they responded because the brain goes into, okay, let me just stay as safe as I can because I'm already in danger.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that because I do see that all the time. People
Hmm.
are always like, but why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And even when some sexual assault survivors do explain that they fought back and that they did, they're like, oh, but you didn't do enough. So what the hell?
Yeah.
Well, even those who have ended uh, the situation by unaliving somebody,
Yeah.
even they end up in prison for defending themselves. So it's like it feels like no matter what the response is by the victim, it is never acceptable by society, and it's a shame. The other thing I wanted to ask you to explain is what a polyamorous relationship is, because this is pretty new to me. I know a little bit about it, but I would like my listeners to be educated on it.
Yeah. So polyamory is a form of what's called ethical non-monogamy. So ENM for short. ENM is kind of like LGBTQIA, right? Like LGBTQIA plus is an umbrella, and all of the different individual queer identities fall under that. Ethical non-monogamy is like the umbrella, and polyamory is one of the types that falls under that. So most people have heard about like open relationships where maybe there's a married couple and they uh, sleep with other people occasionally, but there's nothing romantic. It's just sexual. That's an open relationship. Then there's swingers, right? Where couples swap. Everybody's in the know they're swapping. That's another form of ethical non monogamy. So polyamory specifically refers to having many or more than one, or being open to more than one, because you can be polyamorous and not practicing. But to be with more than one loving relationship at a time. So the amory really refers to it being a romantic or loving based relationship. Polyamorous relationships don't have to be sexual in nature, they can be platonic. I had a queer platonic partner for a long time, but they are relationships that are committed. So it's not just that open relationship where you're hooking up with people or swingers where you're hooking up with people. It is more focused on committed relationships. So for me, for example, right now, I'm in two committed relationships right now, one with my boyfriend and one with my spouse. And I've been with my spouse for almost 7 years now. It'll be 7 years at the end of this year. And then I've been with my boyfriend, who was my best friend of over a decade, for about 3 years now. So it's all about polyamory is really all about open communication or setting the terms for that ethical non-monogamous situation that works for everyone involved. So there's closed polyamory where it's kind of established that no one is going to date anybody else at this time. So the network has been closed off. And then there's open polyamory where people in the polyamorous, I call it the polycule, like a molecule, because there's all those different connections spoking off in different directions. An open polycule, someone in that situation is probably still looking for other dates or openly dating right now. Uh, and that's basically it. It takes so many different forms. There's things called like kitchen table poly is basically what we practice. Kitchen table poly means everybody involved in relationship with whomever in the polycule can sit around a kitchen table and enjoy time together. They can show up to the hospital together if they need to. They can all go out on group dates and do activities together versus like a parallel poly situation would be like if I were dating my boyfriend, but my spouse never saw him. They never
Oh.
hung out.
Mhm.
And that I just want a big happy family where everybody like that's my style. Like everybody gets along even though they're not dating. That's a misconception is people think that everybody in the polyamorous situation has to be polyamorous, but my boyfriend is monogamous. So he's not dating anybody else. And then me and my spouse are more poly leaning, and my spouse is also, goes out and has dated other people. So the situation can change. It can morph. Like it's understood that if my boyfriend at some point in the future did want to date somebody else, he could. But everything is talked about. And I just want to throw out there polyamorous people can cheat, just like
Mhm.
monogamous people can cheat. And it's cheating when it's not talked about and it's not understood or there's not agreements made. And the agreement has been made to be committed to one another without infidelity. And monogamous people cheat all the time, right? So
Mhm.
polyamorous people can still not communicate and end up cheating on a partner. And then there's the people who will say they're polyamorous and use that as a means to cheat and not communicate. And then when somebody finds out, go, oh, but you knew I was polyamorous. Gag. That is not how it's supposed to work. That's not really polyamory. That's using a term and weaponizing it.
Okay, wow. It seems from a person who's never engaged in that, it seems very complicated because
It,
the thing I keep thinking it was hard enough being married to one person.
it's a lot of people tell me that they're like, I don't know how you can do that. And at my maximum, I've had three relationships at once.
Hmm.
And usually it was like two people in person, and then I'd have like a long distance relationship that was mostly online with them coming to visit. That's my maximum. There's a term called polysaturated where you realize like you can't have any more relationships that are committed at that level because we don't have the capacity for true commitment on that intimate, deep level, whether sexual or not, with a dozen people. Like we just can't. we've got we've got to have friends and we've got to have family members and all of that too.
Right. Okay. So then, with each, you have your spouse and you have your boyfriend.
Hmm.
Is it, are you supposed to like love one more than the other?
Mm.
And how would that impact the
Oh
relationship?
gosh, that's a great question. Because this is a thing that happens so much in what I call hierarchical polyamory. There, there's a term online. If you go on the dating apps, called unicorn hunters, where there are these more or less heterosexual couples where the guy really, really, really wants to have just endless threesomes and has convinced his wife to look for another woman. We call these unicorn hunters because they're looking for a bisexual woman who will come in and play a sexual role for them, basically.
I see.
And in those situations, it's always hierarchical because the husband's basically saying, like, yeah, my wife is like my core relationship, but we're going to bring you in here on the side to fulfill a sexual role in our relationship. So that's one form where hierarchy can take place, and that's kind of like the most egregious example. But a lot of couples do adopt what is called hierarchical polyamory, where when they're dating other people, they essentially say my spouse or my nesting partner means the partner you live with. So my spouse or my nesting partner is above everyone else. They will always be who I go to if they are in need. Like they will always get first choice, essentially. I ugh, I have never willingly practiced that kind of polyamory because the love bomber tried to kind of force it on me, and I just was like, we're just not going to be you can't do poly without cheating, so we're not we're just
Hmm.
not until we got way deeper in the relationship, and that's a whole other long story. But uh, you have to be able to communicate and talk about these things because otherwise it's so easy for people to end up manipulated. And when you're playing, like, I'm going to rank this person above someone else, I don't rank any human above any other human. Like, I think everybody is equal. So when it comes to me, I practice non hierarchical. So I see my partners as equivalent, even though the type of love I feel for the individual is different because they're a different person. If you were like, who would you save from a burning building? Which one of them? I'd be like, I'm gonna burn myself alive with both of them. Like it would be so hard
Yeah.
to quote unquote choose or put one above the other. And so that's just like that's how I practice, and I'm gonna go to the person who has more need right now. Like if my spouse is in crisis, I'm gonna go to them. And my boyfriend's gonna be like, please, I'll come along and help, right? Like that's the kind of
Hmm.
relationship we have. So when people do that ranking, it really complicates things because almost always someone's going to feel lesser than, and
Right.
that's not good soil to grow a relationship in.
No, definitely not. So you've had all of these experiences, you've overcome some challenges, and now you're helping the queer community. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of what I've done is just education. Like I have made myself a resource for schools, for nonprofits, for churches, for the therapy community to just talk about LGBTQIA topics, whether it be terminology. The terminology is always changing. That's, it is genuinely challenging to keep up with all of the changes because we live in an era where people are exploring things like neopronouns and very specific niche terms for their gender or their sexuality. And that's great. Like, I love that people are coming up with terminology and words to describe their unique experiences, but the world on the whole is not prepared for that right now. So I just try to make myself a resource to teach and to talk about, at the end of the day, the most important labels to respect are the ones someone uses for themselves. And that is when we're not sure, we just want to ask and get to know
Right.
somebody.
Yeah. So what are neopronouns? That's new to me. I haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, so she, he, and they are considered, I guess we'd call them the standard pronouns. They're like the known pronouns for third person, right? Neopronouns are more niche. So I actually do use a neopronoun in my writing. So I go by she, her pretty much everywhere because it's, again, for me, 9 trillion times more simple than explaining a neopronoun and trying to get somebody to update to that versus online I can just type it and it's fine. But I use air, which is aear, and so it kind of sounds like they, right? A and their air, but I don't like they them. I don't resonate as a they them. I've never resonated as a they them when I've tried that pronoun on. So she her fits fine, But air also delights me because it makes me feel agender, which is I identify as both a woman and agender, like sliding around on the spectrum from genderless to womanhood. And there's pronouns like zer, there's fey fair, there's I couldn't even begin to there's hundreds, I'm sure, out there
Hmm.
of pronouns people have come up with to uniquely describe themselves. And that's great. I think that they're great that people have them, but it's very hard in modern society that already struggles with they, which I don't know why, because it's been in use. The biggest excuse I hear with they is like, oh, it's grammatically incorrect. And, and I'm like, no, it's not. First of all, we've been using it for hundreds of years in English. And second of all, you use it all the time. Oh, someone left their cell phone. Do you know who they could
Hmm.
be? We use it
Right,
all the
right.
time.
Hmm.
So neopronouns, though, do present an extra challenge because there's not many that are common yet. So most people have never even heard of them. And so asking them to like instantly update their whole framework for a person who might be the only person using that term can definitely be challenging. So I always just say, if you're really confused about someone's pronoun, just use their name, right?
Right, yeah. Hmm.
Oh, have you met Dali? Dali's great. I loved when I met Dali. Like you can just say their name over and over again if you're really confused.
Right, right. No, you make a great point, Safrina, because I've had this discussion with my kids because, of course, they're all up to date way more than I
Right.
am with certain things. And they were explaining this air thing, the example you just gave, and you just explained it a lot clearer to me because I was confused. But yeah, there's so many out there, and they're telling me, the kids and my children and their friends were telling me that even though some of them are part of the LGBTQ plus community, it's hard for even them to keep up
Yes,
with.
it is.
Yeah. And yeah, the rule I try to go by is just go by their names, address them
Hmm.
by name. And then if they happen to say identify as, then I try to keep that in mind. And of course, I've messed up because it's really hard to jump into that because the
Hmm.
majority of the people I speak with are either he or she.
Hmm.
Um, and I've had a few. I remember one time I was chatting with somebody and they did introduce themselves and they did tell me they wanted to be referred to as they. And then I automatically just called the person she, and she got really upset. And I was like, wait a minute, you just introduced yourself. Give me some grace here. I'm trying. Um,
It's
because it can
challenging.
get, yeah, and people get very, very upset about it.
They do.
So, yeah. So then you said that you've taught in schools, you created this safe space for kids, which is amazing. Can we talk a little bit about the need for that in schools? Because I know right now there might be people listening and they're just completely upset about everything you have said that you've shared because they probably don't believe about your SA experience. They probably don't believe that it's possible to or ethical to have a polyamorous relationship. They probably don't believe that these pronouns are valid or should exist or anything, so they refuse every single thing. And yet we have people that exist in our world that are practicing these things, and no matter how much you do not agree or do not like them, the fact is it exists. And we do have to live with people who are different than us.
Yeah.
And children, especially children, need support. So what would you say to the parents who are right now really pushing back on the child who's saying, hey, I am not your standard heterosexual human being?
Yeah. So I'm going to put my therapist hat on here and talk about mental health
Mm-hmm.
because there's this reality. I want to speak to the reality and then the myth. There's the reality that a lot of LGBTQI people have mental illness right now. The LGBTQI identity is not the illness. That's the myth. And we established a long time ago in the medical community that being trans is not like the issue, that being trans is not the mental diagnosis. Dysphoria can be a symptom, but it itself is not the mental illness. The mental illness is usually anxiety, depression, PTSD from being berated for being who they are and being made to feel like they can't show up authentically. That's where the illness comes in. That's where the depression really sets in. Like, no one is validating who I am. So, and the anxiety of, oh my gosh, if I speak my truth, I'm going to get yelled at or I'm going to be told I'm wrong. Or the PTSD of I came out and then, in my case, I came out and my childhood abuser went, well, I didn't even willingly come out, right? He was rooting through my stuff and saw that I was writing love notes to a girl and said, literally, if you ever tell about what I'm doing to you, I'm going to tell your mom you're a dirty little lesbian. And that's abuse based on
Mm-hmm.
sexual orientation. And that kind of stuff is where the mental illness stems from. So the most important thing that you can do is validate your child as I understand you're having an experience I might not understand, but I love you and I want to understand to the best of my ability. And even if you can't understand, can you love them unconditionally? Because literally, if you don't, that is where mental illness sets in. I don't know how to make it any gentler than that because
Mm-hmm.
that is literally how the self perception starts to twist and we start to think we're unworthy. And, you know, uh, a lot of kids need that room to just explore who they are. And some of them slip and slide around the gender spectrum for years. And then they settle as trans or they settle as cis or they settle as non binary somewhere down the line when they've been given the room to explore it. When they're not given the room to explore it, they're they're never going to trust you again, first of all. They're not, I mean, I can't tell you how many clients that I worked with who were teens going into early adulthood who were queer and were like, yeah, I could never tell my parents this because they literally sit around and watch the news and make transphobic and queer phobic comments in front of me. I'm not going to come out to them. It matters how you, even if you don't believe, quote unquote, in the lifestyle, first of all, it's not a choice. If I could have converted to being 100% straight, I would have. My spouse would have also converted to being straight, but they only like women. Like, the, we would convert if we could,
Right.
because it would
Mm-hmm.
make our life so much easier
Mm-hmm.
to not be harassed by our parents, our family, our neighbors, our peers, our our employers, left and right. So if conversion was a thing, we would do it. We're not trying to convert other kids to be queer. What we queer adults and allies care about is that the kids just have the space to be. I think that one of the big misconceptions floating around right now is that there's all these children getting plastic surgery to gender reassign. And
Yeah,
that's a
that is
huge
crazy.
myth. Anything that's pre 18 at worst usually is like some hormone blockers while they're figuring out their identity so
Mm-hmm.
that their body doesn't go through like the full the full puberty where you can't ever go back. And these are like the most minute rare cases. Like we're talking under 1,000 people total,
Mm-hmm.
easy.
Right.
So there's these
Mm-hmm.
misconceptions that kids by saying, "Oh, okay, we've always known you as little Johnny and now you want to be little Jenny. Well, let's play with that. Let's make space for that." And maybe Jenny goes for a couple years and she's Jenny and she then realizes, no, I really am Johnny inside and I'm going to go back to that. Or maybe she stays as Jenny and that's who she really is and she just needed the safe space to explore that. When there's any pressure to be, we're going to force a narrative on a kid and they're not going to feel safe to be who they are.
Right. Yeah. And you said, right now, if you had the choice, you would go ahead and change, just to not get harassed and stuff like that. But I do also understand that a lot of people would still choose to stay who they are
Oh, I mean,
because,
truly I would,
right.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh. No, but because I don't want everybody to listening to think, oh, everybody wants to
no.
reverse it. See, we're right. They use that,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that irks me because the way that I think about people who are different than me, regardless whether it's sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, race, any of that, is it's not placing a negative impact on me or in my life.
Hmm.
It is not taking away any of my rights. And this is what drives me crazy about the people who are so against anybody who's different. It is I don't know where this idea came from. I want to say it's politics that has weaponized these differences against people so that they do not support it. Um, at the end of the day, people are human beings that need love. And I tell you, every time I hear from one of my children's friends who are going through something, or who are afraid for their safety, or they feel very unloved and unaccepted, or one, like for example, one of my kids' friends, the parent wants to send her off to this religious conversion therapy thing. This
Mhm.
other one, the mother is so extreme that she will not let her child go out with the same sex because she's so afraid that she might fall in love with that same sex, and like, and
Ugh.
choose to marry, and and it's like that is how controlling some of these parents are, that they just want to suffocate the children and not let them be who they are.
Right.
And I cannot imagine being rejected as a child just for who you are by your own parents, by the people who are supposed to be your safety net.
Yeah.
And like I said again, you don't have to agree with their choice, because you also, just because you agree doesn't mean you have to adopt it. And I think people forget about that. There's like, just because you accept your gay child doesn't mean that you have to be gay too. No,
Right.
right? It's like, where, and look, if you are really cool with calling certain artists um Snoop Dogg, or what was his other name? Because he changed, right?
He
Like
was Snoop Lion for a
Snoop
little bit.
Lion, and you're okay with it. Why are you arguing about somebody's pronouns?
Oh my
Like,
gosh. Yeah, we update people's nicknames all the time, but when it's a
right.
trans thing, all of a sudden it's like the end of the world for so
Hmm.
many people. And I do just want to say it is trauma that's ingrained in these parents because they've seen how people have been treated and they've seen maybe, they even recognize in themselves that they've become a part of bullying that community. And so the worst thing in the world would be if their kid was that,
Hmm.
because then their kid's going to go out and get bullied, including by them. And that's a really like hard thing to confront. I speak a lot to the internalized isms. We all have internalized sexism, racism, internalized homophobia, and transphobia because these are the different things that dominant society has used to other populations to create the boogeyman to perpetuate the us versus them. And right now in modern society, that is the trans community in a large way. And it's not helping their mental health. It's not helping them want to quote unquote convert back to the gender they were assigned. It's just making them fearful, closeted, or dig in deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk now about the people that you are willing to work with.
Mhm.
And, just to give people who are listening right now an idea of, like, would you be the right fit to work with?
Yeah. So I mainly work with leadership and people who are trying to do big systemic work in the world to change the way things work, to make it better and more harmonious for all human beings and the planet herself. I think that the environment is very important. So literally does not matter what field people work in as long as they are passionate about making a difference in the world and making it a better place, they are my people. I do now something that's somewhere between therapeutic shadow work and soul patterning. I really dig into my work with like who people are at this like fundamental level. How did they design themselves to show up in the world so that they can stop living by those limitations, the stories like I can't be out because I'm going to be in danger, or I can't speak my truth about my relationship because blah, 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 blah. Like I help leaders step into who they fully are so that they can actually make the impact that they're here to make. Because we can't when we're shut down and we're small. So I just love working with I can't niche down. I work with queer people, I work with cis people, I work with heterosexual people. I would say it's actually 50-50 when it comes to like are they mainstream sexuality or not. I work with a lot of polyamorous couples and monogamous couples that want to improve their relationship. But I would say the one thing in common is that all of my clients want to be better allies to themselves and others, whether they are a part of a marginalized community or not. I have worked with white Catholic women who wanted to be more inclusive and like understanding of others.
Mhm.
So it really doesn't matter who you are. If you want to make a better world, I'm your person because I will get you out of your own way so you can heck and slay, as I say.
Right. Thank you, Safrianna. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because some people are looking for the education because they don't want to be part of that ignorance that aids oppression.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you do soul patterning, patterning, which I've never heard of that before. I have no idea what it is. And then therapeutic shadow work, and I think I might know what that is. But can you explain what each of those are?
Yeah. So for the therapeutic shadow work piece, imagine therapy, but because again, I am a therapist, but outside of that hat, taking that hat off and donning the intuition and all of the other gifts. So I still do really deep shadow work with people. I do talk about trauma in a non-therapeutic context, but it is less about diagnosis and, digging into the past and more about recognizing the pattern that has shown up for them out of that trauma cycle, and how do we veer off, how do we steer off in another direction. So that's what the shadow work is really about, and helping people understand that we're really in the shadow light dance, and if we try to avoid the shadow, we're never going to get where we want to get. It
Mhm.
is at least 50% of the healing journey. And then the soul patterning, I do work with people's blueprints, and I have another friend that I collaborate with. Her name is Red Moon Eagle. She does these intuitive downloads, and then I go in with people's like human design, their astrology, their gene keys, and something called their bio number, which is a physiological thing. So I help them discover what their biological number is. And then if they also see red, I literally create this like 90-page document where I pull out everybody's patterns from the design that they've given themselves, as well as through how we work through the appointments, so that they can really see the patterns that are theirs and that are their gifts, and the patterns that are based out of trauma. So that's what that work is really about. So again, it's a lot of blueprint. How did you design yourself to come into this lifetime? What were the gifts that you gave yourself to experience this life? What does your cosmic design say about you, and how do you embrace that in your business, in your leadership, in your family life, in your relationships?
Wow, that sounds deep, and I've never heard of it. How did you teach yourself to do this? Is this like part of schooling, formal traditional schooling? And because it doesn't sound like it is. It doesn't sound like because it also doesn't sound like some insurance companies would be
No.
open to paying for it because it's more on the holistic side, right?
Yeah, no, I don't take insurance for anything anymore. That's a whole
Mhm.
other story. I'm going to do my own podcast about that at some point, insurance companies, because it's a nightmare.
Oh
But
yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
oh, I have a ton of formal training as a therapist, and beyond my degree, I couldn't even tell you how many hundreds of hours of additional training on advanced techniques that I still use today. Things like internal family systems, EMDR, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness based cognitive therapy. Like that all is the
Mhm.
techniques in my toolkit. But the blueprint stuff is partially intuitive and partially research. So you can look up anybody's gene keys, astrology, human design, as long as you have their birthday. I then take all of their charts and I literally look for, oh, wow, okay, both their human design and their astrology and their biological number really have them teaching understanding to others. Huh, how about that? Like they've triple dipped in this particular like area where they're meant to teach people how to understand things. So that's what I'm looking for in that. So that has mostly been through reading, looking up the research and the resources online, and then me going in and finding the patterns to help them understand, like, oh, I really am designed to be this teacher. I'm really designed to be a doula. I had a client who has been a birth doula and is now going to transition into both liminal spaces transitions doulaing, as well as potentially death doulaing down the line. Like there's so much opportunity for us to be in our gifts and try different things on. So I really just try to help people find those gifts and really embrace and embody them. I think the thing that a lot of my clients say is that I help them access and understand their gifts so that they're not so afraid to use them anymore. A lot of them have never been validated in their life that they we're an empath or that they can pick up on energy, right? And then they start to work with me and they're like, "Oh, that's normal." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is."
Right. Oh my gosh, that sounds really interesting. I've taken like Myers-Briggs and all these other different
Hmm.
personality tests. I've also tried Reiki because I believe in the power of energy.
Hmm.
And this sounds really interesting. It's like a whole nother, almost a deeper level.
Yeah.
Really, really cool. Oh my gosh.
I
Well,
go very deep with those clients.
yeah,
It's 4
I
months.
bet. Oh, really? Wow.
Yes.
So, Safriana, where can people reach out to you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so Safrianna.com. My first name is where you can go to see everything I do. That's my author page, that's my therapy page, that's my coaching guidance page. So that's like my catch-all. And then livinglunas.com is my brand. Our slogan is uplifting the others. We build community spaces. So if you're looking to come hang out online with people and share funny memes and, stay up to date, we do have a Discord community. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, Discord, that's new or I've never used it. We have a new user's guide for people who have never used Discord before so they can easily get to know the platform that's available right in our channel. And yeah, you can find me online. There's not that many Safrianas in the world. So
Yeah, you're the first one I've met. Are you on social media at all?
I am on Facebook in a limited capacity.
Mhm.
I think it's literally Safi.Luna on Facebook, but I also am more predominantly on LinkedIn. That is where I'm really digging in because that's where leadership is stepping up and speaking about what's important. And I'm all about taking a stand and educating, creating
Yeah,
understanding.
great.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Safriana. Wow, you've really educated me, and I still have so many more questions, but that would take like a part two.
I'm always down to come back and have a conversation with you if you want in the
Thank you.
future.
Yeah, thank you so much. So last question is, since we're going through some tumultuous times right now, what message would you say to listeners, to as far as I don't know, to encourage them to stay positive or to help others?
The the most important message I want everyone to hear right now is that the most important thing you can do is take care of yourself. Not in a like, I don't mean this in a completely I'm the only person on the planet kind of way, but in a I need to fill my own cup first so I can pour out into others. So many of us that are well meaning are absolutely draining ourselves. So we are so depleted and constantly taking in the turmoil of others in the world that then we can't actually do anything about it. We can't stand up. We can't speak out because we're so exhausted. So take care of yourself first, whether that looks like getting your feet on the earth, getting a nice hot shower or a bath and doing some water cleansing, whether that looks like making a cup of tea and having an hour alone to yourself to journal. I don't care what you do for self care, but find that and do that first. Give yourself that gift first so you can keep pouring out into others.
Great, great message. Thank you so much, Safriana.
You're so
I
welcome.
definitely want you back. We need to have more discussions.
I love talking about it all, so
Yeah.
I have nothing to hide.
What I also love is that you are really pushing people's boundaries right now by sharing what you're sharing, making people uncomfortable. But if they are still listening, I say I would applaud them because it is hard sometimes to be open-minded and listen to things that you might not personally agree with, but
Hmm.
that you're willing to accept. And that's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, here I go. See, I told you we're going to go like past the 45-minute mark.
Well, I loved it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Hey, did you like that episode? If you did, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you may be listening and write a review. If you want more tips or some behind the scenes videos, make sure to follow my mom at DaliTalks on Instagram. You can turn on notifications for her posts and stories as well. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. See you next time.